we're going to do today is we're going to get set up on a new way to do some programming, which should provide you, regardless of how strong of a computer you have, the ability to do some programming in a classroom. I'm going to give you a link, which is going to be an invitation to this classroom. So to simulate you go into it, what I'm going to do is copy the link here, I hope, and I'm going to paste it into a new window just to kind of show you the process if you were going to do this fresh. So here we are. I'm going to paste that link in here. Should have just said paste and go. So now I'm not logged in. What I want you to do is I want you to be logged into your Tech Campus email, and I want you to use this. It's called Google Plus, but it's going to use your Google credentials. And so it's going to look slightly different on the next screen because I'm already set up. But I click on this, and it's going to bring up the process for you to put in your ID. If you're already logged into Google, you'll bypass this step, and you'll get right into it with your Tech Campus ID password combo, which is perfect. That's ideal. Otherwise, what we would want you to do is use this is just a sample, use your own ID number. Remember to include the word student at techcampus.org. And then it'll be the same password as you used to get into Tech Campus. So, of course, this is a sample. It's not really set up to be used as such. I don't want you to create an account. I want you to use Tech Campus one. In this instance, I'm going to come in as myself here. And I've got two-part authentication. So once I do this, I'll get an alert on my phone to make sure that I'm actually legit, or that whoever's trying to do this is legit. And I'll need to type in that code. That's an optional thing that you don't have to do, but I would suggest you do just to secure your accounts. That's true not just of your Tech Campus account, but anything, especially banking. You want to make sure you've got it secured. So if somebody does happen to cross your ID password combo, you got another part to it. All right, so now that I've provided my credentials, it should log me in, and it should bring me to the classroom. Now, I'm just setting this up, but let me just take a quick look here and show you briefly what it is. It'll bring up a Hello World program, and just a quick feature here. I'm going to click on the word Run at the top. Before I do so, though, please note in the upper right-hand corner, I need to select the language, and we're going to use C++ to start with. I'll update you if we need to change that. So here's our smallest C program in the world that we basically talked about last week, and it's a Hello World. Now, if I were to run it, it's going to actually compile, link, and run the program. Now, to prove that you've gotten to the point that this works, I'd like you to do a version of this. I've got an input window up that I didn't need. There we go, Hello World. And it finished with a code 0, which we talked about last week, matches with our return number here. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to update this so that it prints out what your first name is. On the roster, I'd like you to also include your session number, today's date, and return your student ID number. So to do that, I'm going to do a copy, and then I'm going to paste that line. Now, you might notice almost right away that I'm using a slightly different version than C in and C out, and I want you to get used to using more than one way to get things in and out, so that when we get to a point we're talking about a game controller, you're used to using a different library to be able to control, whether it's the A, Y, X, B buttons on the Xbox One controller, or whether they're the PS3 controller with the stars, or any PS controller. So you'll have your name in there. I want to know what session you're in, registered to, even if you're attending at a different time. That's just a tradition here, session 1, 2, or 3. Now everything in the middle here is just going to print out as what we call a literal, or the actual value. Tell me, let's see, name, session, date, okay. And then put in today's date. Now, everything in quotes has got to be in quotes. If you get an error message, which I can simulate interactively with you, we'll talk about how to fix errors. Now, if you're already set up on this system, just in case, it's great. And a brief description of what the program does. Now, I'm working in a browser. I don't have any software installed to do this. I have used this on a phone, so I imagine it'll work on a tablet, but it is going to be better if you're working with an external keyboard and mouse, on a Chromebook even. So now that I've got the basic information required, I need to return not 0, but whatever your student ID number is. And since that's still an integer, it should be able to return that. So I'm going to go ahead and run the program. It's going to compile it, link it, run it, and if it works properly, I'll see the output down below. Let me get this little message box out of the way here. Now you'll notice that everything came out on one line. What we may or may not have talked about last week is we can go down a line whenever we want to by using what's called an escape code sequence. So an escape code sequence would be in a backslash, which is the one that's above the enter key. It's different than a comment slash, an N for a new line. All right, so if I do backslash N, oh, sorry about that. I'm going to do an undo. What I ended up doing was, and if I'd done this with the first line before I copied it, that would have been smarter. What I don't want to do is click around with my keys, because I'm going to introduce code completion, which is going to confuse the matter. So by adding these backslash N at the end of each line, this version, and you'll notice the color coding, which is helpful. I'm doing a back key is what I'm doing to prevent that. Is now when I run this new version of the program, I've made changes to it. I'm going to see a copy of all of the information that I'm looking for. Now you'll notice 64 came out instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You might wonder about that. We'll talk about how big an integer is on a particular machine and what happens when the number's too big. We'll talk about that soon. Spoiler alert, this ID number of 6 numbers is going to be too big for a simple integer value. We can talk about that in detail. Hopefully you brought your questions and you continue to bring your questions. The next thing that we should talk about is make sure that your comments relate to you. So you won't always print out this information, but you will include it in comments. I'm going to be smart. I'm going to copy these lines and I'm going to paste them into a comment. Now, because this is a block of commented out statements, it's really not going to care what I have in here, whether it's code or not. So I want you to get in the habit of having a comment block at the top of your source code that includes things like who did the work, what session you're in, what the day's date is, and trivia. If you've had me in the past, you know what my habit was in industry for my dates. I always used the closest holiday. I'm doing coding too much here to actually include that, but when we were greater spaces, I'd always post my code with dates like October 31st or December 25th, because there would typically be a long amount of time between builds. And it was just something I did to entertain myself. And people that saw my code after the fact, I met a guy who had never worked with directly. He said, "Oh, you're the guy who always worked on the holidays, right?" So I hadn't foreseen that as a outcome from it. I was just entertaining myself. As I was talking, I went ahead and converted this into a properly formatted comment. When I run it here, the code has really been unchanged. Well, it's going to detect that the source code file's been changed, but the output will be the same. I haven't really changed anything. And the comments are ignored. Hopefully you're not ignoring me, and hopefully this demo made sense. This is going to be an in-class activity for you to actually connect to this system, type in the code, and when you get to this point that you've got the comments, you've got working output, and you've got it all on the screen, I'd like to see what that looks like. Now, I haven't talked explicitly about printing the screen. It can be as simple on a regular computer as pressing the print screen key, and that's going to give you any monitors you've got up, which is a little bit cluttered. So a preferential way would be to use something called the snipping tool. And if you're on a computer, the snipping tool, or its newest version, would let you grab what I would call the important information. And the important information here would be adequately fulfilled by this screen capture here. This could be saved as a JPEG or some other format. You can copy it from here and paste it somewhere else. This is evidence that you've properly completed the activity. I don't necessarily need to see on the screenshot that you're in the classroom. I'd like to see this completed by the end of our activities on Monday. I'll give you time in class to work on this, but this is the goal, is to set you up on a classroom that you can use. Sorry, classroom can be overused. To set you up with the system so that you can actually connect with a web resource and do some programming. All right, we'll cover it in more detail in class, and it's very important that you communicate your questions, because without questions, I'm not going to know what information you need to succeed, and over time that might build up to be a gap between what you need and what I know you need. So I encourage questions. I desire questions. I get paid the same whether you ask questions or not. So you might as well get your money's worth and ask questions. All right. I'm going to try to wrap this up, and I'll be online with you soon.